So, kind of prefatory remarks. I hope that this year is an occasion for us to focus on what beats at the center of All Saints dynamics in terms of our core values. Now, oftentimes, to a great degree, they are embodied by the resolutions that the vestry of All Saints Church passes. Now, All Saints Church doesn't go quickly into just passing a resolution. We don't even do one every year. But resolutions, in order for them to even get on the agenda of the All Saints vestry, have to spend quite a number of months being refined, researched, number one, refined, made relevant, and the case has to be made whether or not it's really sufficiently important to take up the agenda of All Saints Church, because this is one of the ways that All Saints vestry speaks to All Saints Church, is through our resolutions. Now, we've tried to put all of them together that we've passed in the last recent history, last 25 years, and it moves from everything from being prayerfully pro-choice to being an inclusive church to economic justice issues and on and on. So, if you want to know something about where All Saints stands on social issues, this is the place to go. All of them are on the website. Anybody who asks you, what does All Saints stand for about X, Y, or Z, or why did All Saints Church do this and that, you can send them to the website and find out the rationale, the thinking behind it all. Now, the other pieces that I'm going to work are my little blue sheet that I'm working all year long, and hopefully before the time that you and I adjourn, I can ask you if there are things that are not on this blue sheet that you think we ought to be working this year in terms of our core values. And then the sheet of photographs is the up-to-date where we are with booking guests and speakers in the Rector's Forum this year, all of whom are chosen as they live their lives embodying what I consider to be the core values of All Saints. And that's what this PowerPoint presentation is going to be. Now that more of us are here, I want to welcome absolutely everybody. And those of you who are visiting with us, we extend to you a very warm greeting. We would love it if you would get onto our mailing list. If you're not already on our mailing list, there are green clipboards over here, green sheets, and you can sign up to get an email blast from me every Thursday saying what we're going to be talking about, what we're going to be dealing with and confronting here in the Rector's Forum every Sunday, as well as any kind of special alerts that may be deemed appropriate and essential for you to get. So if you're not already on the mailing list, please sign those clipboards that have green sheets on them. We also have at this table not only all the things that I've just described, but we have all the information related to the Gun Violence Task Force here, which is one of our really most fruitful, effective ministries at All Saints Church, doing all sorts of partnerships with people throughout the country who are staying abreast of both the issues and the upcoming votes in any legislature, be it at the national level or the state level. So if you would like to participate, if you would like to get information from this very important Peace and Justice Task Force, please sign up. Now, let's go through my attempt to articulate what the core values and dynamics of All Saints Church are as we are going to embody them this year. Now, we always start with what's at the heart of our mission statement, which is making God's love tangible in three ways: through spirituality, community, and peace and justice. That's just kind of the core heart that is beating at All Saints Church. And the way we let that take a form kind of on the road, on the street, get traction, is in terms of spirituality. That's where our worship, small groups, education, formation, our interfaith work, our New Narrative Lab and 21st Century Christianity Restatement come. And then out of Peace and Justice, that's where our work is called for in terms of racism, economic justice, immigration, gun violence, peacemaking, inclusion, lots of other issues in terms of social justice. And in terms of community, that's the source of our hope, is all of us being together. And that is the source of pastoral care, our healing groups, our small groups, and our lay counseling. So that's just kind of an overview of All Saints' mission as we've been articulating it in the last 20 years. Now, one theme that we will be addressing here in the forum and in some special Saturdays and Sunday nights will be this business we've been calling the New Narrative, or you could call it 21st Century Christianity, or Cosmic Christianity, or an alternative orthodoxy. And I'll speak about each one of those speakers in the course of this PowerPoint presentation. But just a few words about the New Narrative Project. Now, from Richard Rohr, we hear what he is most famous for in saying is, what is not transformed is transmitted. If you have pain, anger, woundedness, trauma, egocentrism, and you're not working on that and transforming it, we are going to transmit that to other people in our relationships and in our work in the world and our presence in the world. And then our neuroscientist Dan Siegel talks about trauma. Someone who makes sense of their trauma will not pass that trauma on to their own children or others. Someone who has been traumatized but does not make sense of its impact on them will be sadly very likely to pass that on to others. The resolution of trauma is connected to some core making sense narrative process that is related to a fundamental process in the brain. So when we talk about new narrative, we're talking about healing, transforming those things that are troubling us, burdening us, and burdening the world that we are passing on. Also, it includes discovering and creating the health and love in our personal, familial, relational stories and systems, in our religious and spiritual stories, in our theology and rituals, in our roles as national and global citizens, and. That's just a taste of what we mean when we talk about the New Narrative Project or Restating Christianity or a bigger song for religion or. Now, the first person coming to us who is really part of that project is actually coming to us through Vromans on her current book tour, Nadia Bolz-Weber, who is a Lutheran pastor, and she is really a strong, tattooed, pierced, with it pastor of the Church of All Saints and All Sinners. And kind of at the heart of what she's talking about is grace, which was what we were trying to talk about this morning. That grace is not about God creating human beings as flawed beings and then acting all hurt when we inevitably fail. Grace is God saying, I love the world too much to let your sin define you and to be the final word. So if you want to know when these people are going to be here, that's what this sheet is about. And the date by her is October 10, which is a Saturday night, Vromans event. Now, we're also going to be talking about interfaith, because interfaith is really at the heart also of what we do here at All Saints, and we'll talk about all three of these events in just a second. First is Adina Lekovic, who will be with us next Sunday. She's going to be talking about Islam and Islamophobia. She was recently chosen to be one of the 10 most inspirational Los Angeles women of 2015, by the LA Magazine. She gave the inaugural sermon at the United States' first women's mosque, and she and I are going to talk about that. That's a surprise for everybody that there's such a thing as a women's mosque. She says most of the media coverage is still fairly reactive about Islam. It's terror plot or terror threat or arrest narrative. It's real news, but other kinds of stories about Muslim Angelenos are few and far between. What's going on is the absolute epicenter of the Reformation of Islam in Los Angeles. She works as the Director of Policy and Programming for the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and she'll be with us next Sunday. Now, Oprah Winfrey, several years ago, when I was doing a webinar with her, told me that she was leaving us to go to meet with Karen Armstrong about a new project that she was putting her personal money into called Belief. And it takes a look at 33 different persons' spiritual stories. And she didn't skimp on this. She sent her film crew to 28 different nations to observe what's going on. Hope and I were able to join about 300 other people for a viewing of the first 2 episodes and then supper at Oprah's place in Montecito. And she said that if we were going to show these things, she would be here. So we're working with our handlers and schedulers about when she'll be here. But the dates are here. And what we're going to do is we're going to gather on 4 nights in a row, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then come back on Monday night. And over the course of that, we'll see all 7 of these. And you can do it by, I think that's a lot of time for people to commit to. You can certainly come in and out of it. And on another track, I'm going to be at all of them. I've arranged on my calendar to be at all of them. We're going to run parallel with people just coming in and out if they want, a kind of an urban retreat. Now, let me just give you a taste. Just in the first episode, these things are beautifully, and you can imagine, expensively produced. Great production aesthetic value. But in the first one, there is an African-American young woman, maybe late teenager, early 20s, who has had a traumatizing experience to her body. And she goes to Alabama, interestingly enough, weekend retreat, where at the end there is a mass baptism. Now, I am so skeptical from my own history about things like this, but you really do sense that something authentic happened to her in terms of her healing and liberation. And the episode, the film, goes immediately into the story of a Hindu woman from Chicago who goes to the Ganges River and has an experience of being immersed there with the same kind of impact on her that has happened in a river in rural Alabama with this other human being. And what is going on the universal level with all of us wanting to be immersed in healing waters and coming out a new person. Now, it goes to Aboriginal Australia. It goes to all sorts of places. There's an LA hipster who is a championship skateboarder who had the worst possible chaotic life as a child, who finds in Islam his peace and chaos healing so that he can give life and love to his little son, and he's a single father. And it follows him to the Hajj. So you are in for a treat, whether you watch this from your home, you can watch it on cable, or come here and watch it as a group. But we'll be here beginning October 19, and it gives you all the dates for Oprah Winfrey's Belief, and we hope that she'll be here one of those nights. We're also going to be looking at racism in the United States and how it shows up in the 21st century. We'll come back to each one of these people. But we'll start with a conversation between these 2 women. Valerie Batts is on the left, the co-founder of Visions, and Patrice Cullors is on the right, one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter. And they're going to have a conversation and then pull me into it, and that's in a couple of weeks. And they're going to be talking about how racism shows up in modern forms these days, and how through mass incarceration and police-involved shootings and on, we need to really focus in. And they're going to bring me into the conversation to talk about the role that white allies can play in this work. I think it's going to be one of the most thrilling conversations we will ever have had here at All Saints Church. Brian Stevenson has been with us last year, 2 years ago, and he was one of the most stunning speakers we've ever had. His TED Talk is one of the most popular ever. He works for the Institute for Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, and he has committed to coming back to All Saints before I leave. We're still working out when he's going to be here. But he recently got an award for his book, Just Mercies. And in his speech, he said, slavery actually didn't end in 1865. It just evolved. So he's going to be here to unpack all of that. And interestingly enough, Desmond Tutu calls him the Nelson Mandela of the United States. I mean, that is how powerful this young Harvard Law graduate, who rather than hanging out his shingles and making $1 gazillion, is giving his life to getting people off death row. And he's the one who is making sure that we put plaques every place we ever hanged an African American in the United States, because we need to come to terms with that the way Germany has tried to come to terms with the Holocaust by all the plaques that you can see throughout Germany. Tim Wise is a firecracker, and he is a combatant of racism. And he's got a belly full of fire and is so very good at helping people understand the role they play in racism, whether they're people of color or white people, but he really bears down on white folks. And he said, the ignorance of how we are shaped racially is the first sign of privilege. In other words, it's a privilege to ignore the consequences of race in America. He'll unpack that for us. And he's going to be here not only for the forum, but a little conference on Saturday before the forum. All the dates again are on this. Now, All Saints Church really believes in the arts. You can't come to church without being overwhelmed by the beauty of the music here. And the Bible is a book of poems, many parts of it. We sneak poetry in all the time. We love the visual arts. We love theater. We love cinema here. And we're going to have these three people, and we'll talk about them in just a second. We'll start with Richard Hearns, who's a friend of Hope's and mine. He's just 35. He's a kind of extreme athlete, but also a great, great artist from the western coast of Ireland. He was born in Beirut, and then his parents adopted him and raised him in Ireland. And he, from County Mayo, but spent most of his time around Ballyvaughan, where we met him on the western coast of Ireland. He goes to church every Sunday at the Catholic church where John O'Donohue was priest before John left the priesthood. And he really is a walking witness of Celtic spirituality. So he has started an American tour. And on the 30th of October, the night before Halloween, he's having 16 of his pieces shipped to Los Angeles, to All Saints Church. And they'll be on display upstairs. They'll be for sale. And then his wife is a Thai chef. She's fixing the hors d'oeuvres for us. And then after about an hour of viewing and buying and eating, we'll come down here, and he and I have a conversation about Celtic spirituality and the creative process. He's a dear friend. Hope and I own 3 of his paintings in our home, and we're really excited about it. Then my friend Kim Rosen wrote a best-selling book called Saved by a Poem. And she and I had coffee yesterday, and she's committed to coming. She sent me some dates, and we're going to put her on display. She's the person who believes in having poem decks, and that everybody has to have a deck of their favorite poems to which they add all the time and memorize them and give them render them by heart. And she says that changes the body, that changes your life. I love to quote her poem on Good Friday about when you are in the midst of transformation, what happens is you die, and you're like a worm that goes into the cocoon, you liquefy, just like Jesus did in the grave for 3 days. But there's always the bright inevitability of wings. Well, that's the way Kim talks, that poetry is the language of the soul, comes from the mind, affecting your body, your feelings, your very biochemistry of your awareness. True poetry can be a force of awakening. It's a gateway into unitive consciousness, Mirabai Starr says. Now, Elaine Pagels is just an amazing friend. She's a professor at Princeton, has had 6 different best-selling books. She's got a gig up in Esalen, but called and said, maybe I could come by All Saints a day early and just and talk with everybody about what I'm discovering about early Christianity. I mean, one thing she's saying is that early Christianity was not this atonement, let's pay off God, an angry God, by crucifying Jesus, but rather the women's voices were heard and mysticism was heard. And she's really done her research. So she's going to be with us on a Saturday morning, actually Halloween Saturday morning. So we're going to have Richard Hearns on Friday night and Elaine Pagels on Saturday morning, and then we'll limp into the All Saints Sunday Festival service on November 1. But I'm very, very excited about our friend Elaine being with us. One of the things that we're really concerned about here at All Saints is children and what happens to kids and the state of public education. And so Renata Cooper and Michael Aran have agreed to be here, and we're trying to get a commitment from Superintendent of Public Schools, Brian McDonald, to come and let's talk about what happens to children. Let's talk about what happens to teenagers who get thrown away by the culture. And let's talk about how our public education system in Pasadena is responding in a really effective way to that. Immigration is one of our concerns here at All Saints Church, making sure that we have comprehensive immigration reform. Immigration has become a big hot topic with Brother Trump and some other folks. And we want to find out what the status of immigration is in the country. Thomas Sens is a friend of All Saints Church. He gives his life to these issues, and he'll be here, and you can find out what date from that sheet. Dinah Butler Bass has been a chronicler of how religion and Christianity is changing. She's got a new book out, and she's going to be here on her book tour and add her perspective to this whole notion of new Christianity. Now, this is a brand new discovery of mine. Dan Haran on the left. He's a kid. I found out about him through Richard Rohr, who said he's one of the finest young scholars we have. He's written that book called The Franciscan Heart of Thomas Merton. He's a Thomas Merton scholar. And I just really wanted to have him here. And we negotiated, the only time he could give us was the Saturday before Christmas Eve. Now that's going to be a tough time, but we're promoting it as an Advent quiet day, where you come in and hear about Merton's notion of the true self and the false self, Merton's contemplation, why Merton called horses and flowers saints, just by being who God made them to be. We'll be helping you register for that. But I have not met him, but I've read this book cover to cover, and I'm so very impressed and very excited about having him. Reza Aslan is a friend of ours. He's been here 3 or 4 times. He's a great public intellectual. He has really made a dent in our conversation about Islam by talking about what Islam really is as opposed to terroristic Muslims. He doesn't mince words. He's got a lot of courage. He's smart, really, really smart. And he and his wife kind of count. She's Christian, he's Muslim. His parents left Iran when the Shah was overthrown. He really knows about life, and also he teaches writing, creative writing at Riverside. And he's going to be here to let us have it about Islam, the Middle East, and Iran, and the Iran deal. Elia is kind of one of the most exciting theologians going on right now. Now, she's not going to be here in person. She's booked till 2018. And I'm going to let the next rector decide whether or not she or he wants to have Elia in. But several of us were with Elia this summer at a Francis Factor conference that she and Shane Claiborne and Richard Rohr put on, talking about the phenomenon of Pope Francis and Saint Francis. And she's the person who is not only a scholar, but a scientist. She has a PhD in pharmacology, and then she went into the convent and is a Franciscan nun and teaches at Georgetown and now Villanova, and writing some of the most exciting things I've ever seen about wholeness, and that Jesus was a whole maker. And that if you're not a whole maker in your mind, then you're not understanding the interconnectivity and integration of the entire cosmos. So she talks about cosmology, Catholicity, and contemplation. I'm very excited about y'all gathering together around some videos of her. Ken Turan is the most popular Rector's Forum speaker we have. Everybody loves to come the Sunday before the Oscars and hear Ken talk about his favorite movies. One of the things I love about Ken, he's a committed member of Leo Beck Temple. So he's one of our Jewish interfaith friends. And he always talks about justice and peace and what really makes for healthy humanity. His critiques of movies are not just about the movie making or the ability for the actors to do a good job. But he's always talking about how these movies are conveyances for, is that the right word? Conveyor belts? Conveyance for delivery systems for justice and peace. My brother James Carroll is going to come back. He'll be here on my birthday, February 14. He has a weekly piece in the Boston Globe, wrote the greatest book called Constantine's Sword about interfaith work and anti-Semitism. The last section of that book is his agenda for Vatican III, if the Catholic Church ever had a Vatican III. He and his wife swear that they would be members of All Saints if they lived here instead of in Boston. But they have continued to maintain their Catholic identity, and he's been doing some awfully fine writing for The New Yorker about Pope Francis. So we're going to be able to talk with him about Pope Francis, whether there are some real changes going on in the Catholic Church or not. And he's a keen student of the Middle East, anti-Semitism, a critic of the state of Israel, and it's going to be a really great moment. He's going to preach and teach. Dan Siegel, whom I absolutely adore, my neuroscientist friend, did a soul and synapse retreat for us last year. And I walked into the car when it was all over. And he said, I'm finishing up a book on the mind, and I want to know if you'll read it for me and tell me what you think. I said, of course. So he sent me the manuscript for it, but before he sent it to me, he rewrote the last chapter and described what happened in this room in a conversation between him and me, and makes some pretty audacious claims about how the mind, which he thinks is bigger than our individual brains, how the mind was working in that event. So he's going to come back and teach us some more. He's constantly growing, and I'm very, very, very excited. He will be here toward the end of my tenure. Richard Rohr is coming out of retirement to come to All Saints for the last month, the weekend of the last month before I leave. Richard's been the pony we've been riding in terms of a new Catholicity, a new orthodoxy, a new narrative, an alternative orthodoxy. One of the finest scholars I know. All of us need to be praying for him, because if you subscribe to his daily meditation, you found out this past week that he has prostate cancer. And we need to be praying for him. From what we know about prostate surgery, et cetera, and treatment, that ought to be a easy thing for him to get on the other side of and still make his appointment with us. I hope that's going to be the case. But even if I were not cheering him on to come here, I would be cheering him on for health. So I'm trying to be magnanimous here. But I am very, very excited for us to have a time with Richard Rohr. He has said, "My only message in all of my books is that humans enjoy an inherent God-given connection with God, and that changes everything. And you don't have to have Jesus dying on the cross to earn that inherent connection with God." In fact, he goes on to say, "It is impossible not to be connected to the source or to be on the vine," as Jesus says. But most people are not there consciously yet. They are not saved from themselves. He's talking about their small self, which is the only thing we really need to be saved from. They do not yet live out of their objective, totally given, and unearned identity hidden with Christ and God. Really excited about him being here. Gene Robinson is coming back, the great, wonderful bishop who is the first openly gay bishop ordained to the episcopacy in the history of the church. And he is going to be talking about his own life, inclusion, and the next steps in LGBT human rights. He's famous for saying, "The Jesus I follow always stood with the poor and the powerless. Whether the issue touches women or gays and lesbians, our religion should be about love, not less, be more about love." My final guest is going to be Brother Greg Boyle. Greg invited Hope and me into the home of the Jesuits in East LA when we first moved, because I was already involved with Jesuits in Mississippi. And he's been a close friend all the way through, and he's come whenever I've asked him to come. So I was praying and wanting to know who I wanted to be the last conversation I had in the Rector's Forum, and I wrote him and asked him to do that. And he said, "Absolutely, buddy." So he'll be here to talk about the power of compassion and tender and kindness that can transform the world. So I end with two images that I love, images of our life eternal. This is from Richard Rohr, that to externalize God is to ignore a central text in Acts. One way of understanding that is that we swim in God. God is not some out man with a gray beard. As Acts said, Paul stood up and said, "God's not far away from any one of us. For in God we move and live and have our being." In other words, we swim in God. And I just love this. This is my Facebook, my screensaver. It's a photograph that was taken on the 25th anniversary of the Hubble Space Telescope this past April 26. It is a cluster of 3,000 stars known as Westerland 2 in the constellation Carina. When I see things like this, I understand that any kind of vision of heaven as a place with pearly gates and streets paved with gold is pure metaphor, and it's too bad that the church literalized that. So that's it. Let's see what you think. Let's see if you have any thoughts. Are we not covering something? And this is the blue sheet that I'm talking about, that I'm working. At the top are all the people, and at the bottom are the values. Have I missed some values that are important to you for us to really give voice to this year? Yes, Eddie? Oh, you're going to, okay. Any comments? Yes, please.
Although it would be included in a couple of areas here, I would think overpopulation of
Good.
the planet. would be one to address.
Absolutely. And thanks for saying that. We have about 10 or 11 open spots. We try to keep open spots so that we can fit things in for relevancy's sake. And one of the things we haven't done is put in climate crisis issues, and that certainly would be a part of that. So let me just simply make a note about that. Thank you very much. Other comments, please. Margaret.
This is another one that could be included in almost any of the categories, but I always feel like the elderly are a population of people that really fall through the cracks, and the older I get, the more I realize that that's true.
Yeah.
They fall through every crack.
Yeah.
And
not knowing anything about the aging process, maybe I can find somebody who could say something about it.
Maybe.
That's good, maybe. Thanks, Margaret. I interestingly enough, just got introduced to somebody who is this Zen Buddhist up in San Francisco involved in palliative care. And he might be the person, and I think we could get him in. Yeah. Please?
This encompasses a lot of things also, but accessibility.
Uh-huh. Thank you. Yes?
You mentioned once in a sermon trauma and how it's affecting children in
Yes.
schools, and they're considered to be hyperactive, but really they're just having anxiety from trauma they've suffered. And it also goes into racism and how
Yes.
kids are being treated as criminals, but
Thank
really
you.
they're actually have suffered trauma.
Thank you.
And as an adoptive parent, I read
Yes.
a lot of adoptive stuff. Children who've been adopted are considered to have been traumatized.
Yes.
And so I think it's an important topic for all ages, actually.
I couldn't agree more. And there's all this stuff about being scared sick, that people who are traumatized are really set up for having obesity, blood pressure problems, cholesterol problems, and diabetes. And it's a kind of a sentence, for people who are scared sick is the book. Thank you very much. I'll put that on the list. Yes. Who? There was somebody over here, and there's somebody right here. Okay, we're going to wrap it up because I got to go preach some more. Yes.
It seems to me that, thinking about this past week, money in politics
Good.
just shapes politics. And what do we do about that? I think about climate change and how we fight climate change when the money is keeping climate change at the back of the
Exactly.
Conversation.
Exactly.
All that sort of stuff.
And the NRA and war and
All that, yeah.
Please. Yes.
This ties in with that also. Combating narcissism.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm going to have to get help on that since I haven't worked on mine yet. So it's never too late to send me an email. Please do so. Thank you so very much for your attention and for showing up today. Can't wait to get the year started. Bye-bye.